Welcome everyone to this highlights of the Imagine Belfast Festival. We're absolutely delighted to introduce Bonnie Greer to you tonight. She's a distinguished author and playwright, and she's someone who's been hoping to involve in the festival for some time now. Bonnie is an advocate of free speech and has promoted the voices of women and minority groups for many years. The recipient of an OBE in 2010 for her contribution to the arts. Bonnie has also been awarded the Verity Bargate Award for Best New Play by the Soho Theatre, and she's also received quite a number of other accolades. So I'm delighted to welcome her to our festival programme.
Oh, I have to, sorry. I hope I'm speaking. I'm afraid I'm a techno. I'm one of these people where the lockdown has caught them completely unawares. So I'm learning as I go. And thank you very much for inviting me to this festival. Belfast has always been a part of my imagination for many, many years. And I had the pleasure of coming to Belfast a couple of years ago, and I was taken in a taxi by a man who said he had to leave Belfast at one time. I didn't ask him why, but he told me a lot about the city. And I got to see it. I had the most wonderful food, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. So I hope to come back again, and thank you. Just saying, part of my techno idiocy is that my printer broke down today, so I couldn't get it together. So I'm going to talk to you through using this method, old school cards. And if I stumble a bit, please forgive me. This talk is called Enduring Red Summer, and it refers to the Red Summer of race riots of 1919 after World War I. And the reason I'm going to talk about this is because many of my Irish friends send me these notes and things, and they say, my parents, my friends, my relatives back in America, they support Donald Trump. So what do you mean by saying that, Ireland is very important to the United States when these people are Trump supporters? They have these big Trump flags and all of this. They don't understand what Ireland is about. Now, what do you mean by all of this? Because I don't recognize these Irish Americans you're talking about. So as I say, this talk is a little bit of trying to explain that to you, of what's going on, what has gone on amongst the Irish and African American communities. So here I'm going to start reading my cards. This story begins because I grew up in Chicago on the South Side. And the mayor's name when I was growing up in the 60s was Richard J. Daley. And his name was all over the place, on all the billboards, all over the highways. His name was around so much that I thought his first name was Mayor. I had no idea what his first name was. And for me, Irish meant power. The Irish were just the most powerful people in my world. Everybody who hurt Black people and hurt Hispanic people were Irish. But Irish, too, was the young priest who baptized all of us and became such a good friend of my late father and who buried my father. Irish, too, were the nuns who took care of us and taught me everything I knew when I was a child academically. And so they were people I had respect for, but Irish also meant privilege and power and agency. We Black kids had no idea that there was a place in the world where Irish people were looked down on, that maybe they had no power, they had no agency. We couldn't imagine that. I grew up in the 60s in the civil rights movement and opposed in Chicago everything that what was called machine politics. And machine politics were controlled by the Irish. So in early 1970s, I wanted to write a play, my first adult play. And I was very inspired by Bernardo Bertolucci's play 1900. And I wanted to write a play about Chicago that had that kind of overview. So I thought, what could I write about? And then I discovered the race riots of 1919. And so I called my play 1919. And I was happy to learn that the mayor of Chicago, who I detested, was also involved in those race riots as a boy. He had a gang called the Reagan Colts, and they participated in this pogrom. The clash between Irish Americans and African Americans was always there, but it really hit its peak post World War I, when African Americans left the land in the South, deep segregation, and they moved to the industrial North, where they came in search of a better life. And they were, of course, in competition with working class Irish people, Irish Americans, who were living in the same squalid conditions, working in the meat packing factories, on the railroads. And so these young Black men who came from the war, who fought in the war, wanted a new life for themselves, for their families, came in conflict with Irishmen, principally Irish American men. And I guess you would call what happened pogroms all over America as a result. And what I mean by pogroms is that Black people were burned out of their homes, burned out of their businesses, murdered, lynched. And in the summer of 1919, a young Black boy in Chicago crossed the invisible line at the beach at Lake Michigan. And this invisible line existed during my childhood too. My childhood was in the 60s. Well, my young teenage years and my late childhood was at the beginning of the 60s. And it was understood, if you understood it, that the beach was racially segregated. So there was a white side and there was a Black side. And you didn't cross into the white side, and the white side was better. So I never learned to swim because our side of the beach wasn't really good. So this young Black guy in 1919 accidentally crossed into the white side of the beach, and a race riot broke out. And I lost my page. A race riot broke out. And like I say, it was a pogrom, really, because if you look at a pogrom as a massacre perpetrated by a power looking for and destroying people based on their religion solely or their color, that's what happened. And that's what happened in Chicago. Black people were pulled off streetcars, killed, their houses were burnt down, their businesses were burnt down. And these were largely by people who proudly call themselves Irish. And this mirrored the draft riots in about, I think, 1863, maybe 62 in New York. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln instituted the draft, and Irish Americans in New York revolted against the draft. For one reason, New York depended heavily on the Confederacy. Their business depended heavily on the South. And the second reason is that these Irish Americans did not want to fight or be in the Union Army, which principally was being sold as not only a fight to save the Union, but a fight to emancipate African Americans from slavery. They didn't want to do it. So they revolted. If you see the film Gangs of New York, Martin Scorsese's film, he doesn't tell the whole story of what those gangs were about and what they were doing. But they were there to terrorize African Americans largely, and they did. And they hung Black people from lampposts, they burned their houses, burned churches, Catholic churches, Protestant churches. And so that's our legacy in the community. And the other part I want to say too is that I have good stories as well. the story of JFK, the first president in my lifetime. Bobby Kennedy, his brother, the Attorney General, fought for civil rights. And of course, we got Joe Biden, who chose the first African-American, Asian, and woman to be vice president. So Irish and African-Americans can be a good story. And of course, during the anti-war movement, which I grew up in, Irish Americans were in the trenches with us and fighting with us for open housing, fighting with us in the civil rights movement. So it's a mixed story. But lately, and what's been exasperating is that Donald Trump has captured this demographic, and partly it's because America is becoming a rapidly, very rapidly a minority majority country. The demographic is changing. People of color are the growing population. By mid-century, they will be in the majority. And so what he's done is caught not only Irish Americans, but I am talking about Irish Americans. So he's caught Irish Americans in that loop where they've been anyway and brought them to his side. And so in this moment of time, Irish Americans who have prided themselves on the same values that African Americans have: hard work, taking care of yourself, taking care of other people, church, school, family, caring about the American dream, have forgotten that they were part of the same struggle that we've been to a certain way. They've forgotten their past. They've forgotten that they too came over on coffin ships. No, they weren't enslaved, and there is no such thing as Irish slaves. It's one of Steve Bannon and the right-wing sort of myth that's pushed to Irish people. Irish people came over in terrible conditions on ships. They were indentured, some of them as well, but they were never property. They were never commodities. They were never assets like a car or a dog or horse. They never were. But yet that lie was pushed through 2015 in order to show to them that they had the same agency as African Americans. They were once, Irish Americans, looked down as foreigners, and now they're looking down on others as foreigners. They're leading, in too many instances, the assault on the democracy. You would have found Irish Americans at the Capitol. You've also found Irish Americans defending the Capitol and defending the American way of life, but they're not getting a big look in. I wanted to read something that James Baldwin, if I can, I hope I can, I can read what I wrote, that James Baldwin wrote about becoming white. Because one thing James Baldwin said, and this is true of Italian Americans, Polish Americans, and Irish Americans, they didn't become white people until they went to America. Because they think they are white, they cannot allow themselves to be tormented by suspicion that all of us are brothers. Because they think they are white, they are looking for stable population. They're looking for cheerful natives. They're looking for cheap labor. Because they think they are white, they believe, as even a child believes, in a dream of safety. Because they think they are white, however vociferous they may be, and however multitudinous, they are as speechless as Lot's wife, looking backward, talking into a pillar of sorts. These are not all, again, I want to stress this. This is not everyone of Irish descent. I want to try and answer a question that people are asking me about why their relatives are on the other side. They are part of Make America Great Again, but they've forgotten at one point they were not. At one point, they were the dregs of the earth. At one point, they were suffering like Asian Americans are suffering now, that they had to deal with being beaten up and killed like Asian Americans are enduring now, and like African Americans always have, and like Indigenous Americans always have. So that's basically what I want to say to you tonight, and really open to questions and discussion. And I hope what I've said is made the situation clear to you and understandable. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you, Pete.
Very interesting discussion. I was wondering if I could just kick things off by first of all inviting people to submit questions. You can even vote them up and give an indication of priorities. But the whole point of the festival really to encourage debates. And one of the reasons why we wanted to involve Bonnie in our festival is that she has this fantastic ability and track record of being provocative and not being frightened, of sharing her views. And perhaps that's the perspective that comes from being American, Bonnie, that
might be, or Chicago.
But even though you've been based, and you are indeed a British national, as far as I understand, you've been here, you've been
yes,
in the UK
yes,
for a long time, but you still
yes.
have, I think, that perspective, that sort of outsider view to ask the difficult questions and to challenge us. And I suppose for Irish people, your views are, in one level, I suppose, quite shocking. We Irish pride ourselves in being the most oppressed peoples in the world. At one level, I'm sure people do find it surprising that Irish Americans, are regarded by many, people as racist and prejudiced. And I do remember actually going to the States, as a young man, and being quite shocked by Irish American policemen and the way they were perceived. That's sort of, unfortunately, Irish America, to many people, was seen as a very oppressive police force, and the generation.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
People.
And as I said, Pete, my town, the St. Patrick's Day parade looked like the Soviet Union's fly past, for us. I mean, it was just, we all had to wear green hats and things. And when you're a little kid, that's fine. We didn't know what it meant. And like I say, the power that Irish Americans had and kind of still have in the thing called the machine, which elected JFK, which in fact you couldn't be a Democratic candidate for president unless the machine backed you in Chicago. Nobody. I don't think I don't think the machine is so much there anymore because our mayor is African American, but the machine is there. So it is shocking. I was a little nervous when I first came to Ireland because my experience of the Irish Americans was beside my teachers and some people in the movement, just the ordinary people, wasn't positive. It just was not a positive experience. So that's how Trump captured them, and he plays them because he's not interested in them, but they are available to him to do the things that he wants to do, and they buy it.
Yeah. Before we move on to say, talk about contemporary sort of issues, I thought your comment about Joe Biden, for example, was interesting. Can we explore just a bit more about the history, of Irish American influence? And I see that Anna Corbett has raised a question. She asked, did Irish Americans become the most successful immigrant group in the early days of the New World?
Well, not in the, it depends on what you mean by the early days. They weren't there in the early days of the New World, so they didn't come over as a force, I think, until the early 19th century. But remember, of course, it was the British, the English. I left out some part of what I was going to say. The people who owned my father's people in the South, who had enslaved them, of course, were called Scotch Irish. because my last name is Greer. So that's a huge demographic in America, and very, very powerful people are very emotional about that. And they came from what was called Ulster Plantation. And so that's a very big demographic too, which is tiny bit different from, say, people who came from mainly what we now call the Republic, but the Scotch Irish were there right at the beginning, pretty much. And that's why I'm Greer, because they owned my father's people. So to say that, I guess you would say, I guess on that level, I would say yes. But what I'm talking about mainly are the great influx during the famine, the Great Famine, where people came during the Great Famine. And these were working people, these were working class people. They were not landowners. They had no money. They were poor people. And that was the demographic that most Irish Americans are descended from.
And it's interesting that Kathleen O'Donnell asks, in the trouble of 1919 that you reference, were there any differences in the attitudes of the orange and the green Irish?
To be honest with you, I don't know, but I think the only Irish in Chicago would have been green. I mean, we still dye the river green, which they need to stop doing that. But they dye the river green. So this is green, absolutely. I wouldn't think it would be anything. In fact, when you say Irish in Chicago, it is not, it's the Republic. You can't think of anything else, and don't think of anything else. In New York too.
That's right, yeah. And one of our festival artists, Sinead O'Neill-Nicholl, asks, first of all, she says, great talk, Bonnie.
Thank you, Sinead. I love that name.
Indeed. No relation to me, by the way, Sinead.
Love that name.
Sinead basically asks, for the benefit of Irish people appear in white so they can leave behind, their past, i.e. there's a benefit of being white, and that's a benefit not afforded Black or brown Americans. She says she's horrified to hear that the Irish would not have any empathy for others who have suffered. Is that something that you think you can relate to?
Well, of course, that's a big generalization. Like I said, the nuns who taught me, and they were dedicated to our community, were Irish. The priest who stayed with us and was part of our lives till my father died, and even after, was an Irishman. So the sort of mission of Irish Americans toward working with oppressed people, and their own people who were oppressed too in many ways. They just were told they weren't in some instances, is a strong one. But again, when you think about on the sort of capitalist, monetarist level, when you've got two communities, both poor, both working class, both oppressed in their own way, both living in poor housing conditions, which one's going to win? America is going to be the one with the white skin, because America is racist. That is what's going to happen. And the Irish people who decided not to go that way were not a huge majority of people. And in a way, because they and that, to be honest with you, that's human. I mean, most people don't want to rock the boat. They're going to live their own lives. If I have a home in the suburbs and I'm around my own, family and my kin, I'm not out here to do politics. But and they were very active in the civil rights movement, but it began to shift in the 70s with the recession. Americans haven't had a pay rise since the recession, a great recession of the 70s. Irish Americans and Black Americans worked in the car plants in Detroit. There was a huge, huge race riot there during the war because of that, because of the clash. My dad worked in a tin can factory outside in Cicero, where the large contingent of working class men out there were Irish American. he had to take a baseball bat to work every day so that he didn't have to fight these guys in the parking lot. And at the same time, he had friends among that community. So it's always been a mixed picture, but it's important to understand why so many of them support Trump, because what he did was, and it was evil, frankly, what he did was tell them that their way of life, everything they worked for, everything that they were about was being threatened by the likes of me, and turn that on. And these people could see that uh, the African American community, the Hispanic American community, the Asian American community was growing, and their community was not. So there was a lot of buttons that Trump pressed and still pressing with that community, which are his largest supporters, I'm sad to say.
Well, I think David Clare makes it an interesting point here. He thinks that, do you think there's always been a deep split among Irish Americans where some go to the right, like Trump supporters, or to the left, like Jane Elliott, Mother Jones, and of course you've referenced JFK. And why do you think there is that big split, ideological split among Irish Americans?
The Irish Americans, of course, were unionized, and they organized very, very early, in sort of their coming over, as much as when they were able to. A lot of them changed their names like Jewish people did so that they could just be in that flow of whiteness. And that's what I mean by whiteness. You could just not be an O'Neill or whatever. You could change your name, and nobody was the wiser. So you could actually get through your life. The same thing the Jewish people did. It was a way of getting through life. And then suddenly one day you become that thing. You are that thing. You don't remember how you came over. You don't remember what you left behind. You just don't remember because you become a success. And America, because of its racist nature, constantly reminds you that you're a success because you don't have this. So you then decide, and people do normal things. They turn around and their kid, if your kid can get into Harvard, which is the top of the tree, why shouldn't you work to let that happen? If you can live in a safe neighborhood and not have to worry about paying rent, if you don't have to worry about the oppressive conditions that Irish Americans lived in when they first came over, simply because you have white skin and maybe you changed your name too, that's what people did. So it's that whole sort of trajectory of, as James Baldwin says, whiteness that the Irish American community en masse bought into. And now they've hit a wall because whiteness isn't able to fly anymore in the United States. And while their kids are part of Black Lives Matter, Asian Lives Matter, they're out there in the streets working to help people, they're proud of their own lineage as Irish people. Their parents are stuck in a trope that has to do with whiteness. And they're stuck in it. And Trump has bought them.
Well, Catherine makes the point, is it just human nature that when your group rises a little above another group, you then have to oppress them? She thinks it's very depressing. And then Joseph adds, do you think Catholics now favor republicanism and conservatism rather than their traditional, if you like, Democrat sort of allegiances? I believe more sort of Irish Americans seem to be in the Trump camp, particularly the older generation.
Well, having been raised Roman Catholic, I can tell you, of course, you know what the issue is. It's about life, pro-life. And that's where a lot of, if people are professing to be Catholic, that's where they come down on. The Republican Party trumpets itself as being pro-life. They don't care too much for people who are actually walking around with two legs, but they pretend to be pro-life. And of course, if you're religious, a lot of people have a problem with that. They have a problem with abortion, and so the Republican Party is a flag they can fly behind, even though they may not agree with everything. Trump gets them on pro-life. He doesn't believe in. He's not a pro-lifer either, obviously, but that's a way for him to get them, and that's where they fall in. And they will tell you that's where they march. My own relatives were Republicans before Trump. were Republicans because they were pro-life. And you know, you can't argue that because that's a person's religion. That's what they feel. And as far as I'm concerned, they're played. And it's difficult for people to, it's difficult to get into discussion with that. And I respect people's views on that, deeply respect them. I'm not, but I deeply respect them. I'm pro-choice. But I deeply respect people's views on that. And I think there is a, a line you can't cross with people because it's deeper than just talking to their brain. And Trump goes straight in at that on people. And that's how he's captured a lot of Irish people.
Well, Joseph so makes the point that the church is probably, or religion is probably a bigger factor, perhaps, rather than the historical association with Ireland, and that if the church is conservative, then people will follow that. But I think Shaz asks a very important question: do you think Trump is going to make a comeback? God, I hope not.
Well, Trump will be. What will he be in 2020? What will he be? He'll be in his late 70s. He's not a robust man. The only thing that would make him come back is his own sort of what we call honoriness, is his just being honorary. No, I don't think so. I was pretty sure he was going to lose after. I was saying I didn't know, but it started to smell like he was losing, and he's not going to come back. He doesn't have the stamina. He's a deeply lazy man. The only thing that keeps him going is his own ego, which is, keeps a lot of people going. You can go on you thrive on ego, but he's deeply lazy. I don't see that. He wants to be a kingmaker. That's easier for him. And of course, Trump might be in jail. He's in a lot of trouble in New York State with his finances and his personal taxes. So Trump might be in jail. Let's hope.
And maybe just harken back a bit more, to the history of, Irish America. Andrew asked a question basically that, how Irish Americans who are essentially Catholics and the MAGA culture, which is essentially white, evangelistic, Protestant, how did they manage to coexist together? Are there simple commonalities like abortion opposition, which actually...
That is it. That's the one. That's the one. That's the one. And it's very deep. The church has not come, the church is pro-life, and there are individuals in the church, priests, nuns who are pro-choice, but the church is pro-life. And it would be because the Vatican is pro-life. And so yes, that it is religion, it is those kind of issues. And I think that is the core issue. And you'll talk to a lot of Irish Americans and they'll say that's why they're there, because they're pro-life. And I suppose, I guess because I'm pro-choice, I can understand what a pro-life person is about. It's not about your religion, it's also about how you proceed in the world, how you see the world, how you go through the world. And just as a pro-choice person believes that an individual has the right to determine her life and her choices herself, I suppose a pro-life person believes that there's another ascendancy that has to be taken into view. And that's how they go through life. So Donald Trump supports that, and I'm saying it's superficial, but Donald Trump supports that. And so they have to fall in line with that, and they have to buy the whole ticket. It's not just, I'm pro-life and that's why I'm here. Pro-life becomes attached to the idea of the federal government as intrusive and even demonic, to take it to the extremes. That's always been America too. That's a deeply Protestant strain, by the way, English. And the Irish who are pro-Trump have latched onto that too, as being part of the whole anti-life kind of conspiracy. They don't mind paying taxes, but again, that comes into federal government overreach, the whole idea of desegregating schools, the so-called woke culture, where you You pay attention to how you speak to people, what you do to people. All this becomes federal overreach, whose fountain is the pro-life movement. And it's very, very easy to fall into all of that. And a lot of Irish Americans do.
On this topic, Claire Hackett asks, first of all, she's thanking you, Bonnie, for this great discussion.
Thank you, Claire.
Her question is, do you know if Irish Americans feel a disconnect from the country of Ireland, which, as you know, is largely anti-Trump, and also experienced recently great changes in social attitudes, particularly towards the Catholic Church and, you know, on issues like reproductive rights? You know, is there a disconnect between Irish Americans and, if you like, current Irish public opinion?
Well, Ireland is, because the Irish are so prolific in literature in America and entertainment in America. Ireland becomes, I call it the sort of emerald green dream. People have no idea about Ireland. And of course, and I don't blame you, the Irish cash in on it. You know, you can go to Dublin and there's a special little entrance for Irish Americans to go, you know, fast tracked. And there are all kinds of little mythologies that can be played upon with Irish Americans. Ireland is very deeply, in fact, they say in New York State, for instance, if you don't understand and respect and support the three I's, Israel, Italy, and Ireland, you actually can't get public office in the state of New York or New York City. And the Ireland that is promulgated is a fairy tale. And the fairy tale is twinkly. The other part of the fairy tale is, you know, sort of revolutionary forces fighting oppression constantly, 24/7, you know, all of these kind of dream states. And the complexity of Ireland, the richness of it is not understood. But that's also Americans. Americans don't go anywhere. They don't understand the world. So let alone the country of their origin. I think it hurts the Republic. It hurts it hurts the Republic. I think it hurts Northern Ireland, because there is this dream of Ireland that Ireland has to stand up to, if you like. I mean, the Taoiseach is the only world official who has an open invitation to the Oval Office. It's open. And the Taoiseach was there and will always be coming there. And that's because of the myth of Ireland, not the reality of Ireland. So, and even Barack Obama, who's Irish on his father's side, on his mother's side, came to honor the myth of Ireland. So Americans don't see Ireland in any kind of dynamic, changing way as part of Europe or not part of Europe, or its relationship to the United Kingdom or not. And I think it's problematic, and it does add to those little shamrocks that you see on people's Twitter accounts and on their Facebook pages and their Instagram and their TikTok. It's the dream. And I know that Ireland, North and South, will one day wake America up from it. It's necessary. It's deeply necessary.
Well, that sort of echoes a comment that Colin Brown has made about how we can help Irish Americans remember that freedom equals justice for all, and that, you know, it's not a dominant culture. And Janie, I think, makes another very pertinent comment. She's thanking you, for example, for holding a mirror up to us Celts. But how do we reconcile this? As a Scot of Irish ancestry, I understand how we all carry our histories like totems. Do you have any thoughts about how we can move past this as communities?
I read history at university, so history is profoundly important to me. I used to be deputy chair of the board of trustees of the British Museum, and I'm back at the British Museum working on a project that has to do with history. History is profoundly important to me. We look at our own lives and we see a long arc. But from the Glorious Revolution to now is not even the length of time that it was between the fall of Rome and let's say the invasions of Rome. It's not that far. It's very recent. The Republic coming into being yesterday. So in a sense, if we can look at things in that way, we can see that what we are doing is handing on things to our descendants. And how do we hand them on? I think we hand them on by being as clear about history as we can. You cannot transcend history, but you can understand history. You can challenge history because history is told by the people who win history. So us losers have to get involved. And we have to really get involved by learning history at 360 degrees as much as we can. That takes our own research. That takes reading people other than the canon. That takes interrogation. That takes really being fascinated by history. I couldn't look at Gone with the Wind for decades, because of the way slavery was depicted, which was crap, was false, it was a lie. But as I grew to understand the cinema and love the cinema and realized that this movie is one of the masterpieces of the American studio system. And if you care anything about movies in the golden age, if you don't know Gone with the Wind, you don't know anything. So I had to actually go back and look at this movie. And of course, the heroine of the movie is called Scarlett O'Hara. Her father has an Irish accent. All of that is BS. But it was part of a way to lure the Irish into the Ku Klux Klan. That's because the 30s was the start of the sort of the push, the 20s and 30s was the push for that. So the way you do it is to lure the Irish into the Ku Klux Klan. Nobody with an accent like that owned any property in the South because they were indentured or they were workers. They owned nothing like that, okay? And this whole idea of some massive plantations with thousands of slaves, that was BS too. Plantations were small landowning things with handfuls of people. And the mythology that grew up about the beginning of the 19th century, 20th century, is Ku Klux Klan mythology. And they sucked the Irish into it. And of course, comes Gone with the Wind, one of the great masterpieces of the apology for racism, one of the great masterpieces for the mythology of the lost cause, i.e., that somehow the South was some sort of noble entity that was oppressed by the North and led by their African-American minions. That was what a lot of Irish Americans insist on. And I want to say this again, it's important. Gone with the Wind is a myth, and it's a racist myth, and it's a myth with a purpose. So enjoy the movie, which I do. It's a beautifully made film, and it's strong, but you're looking at a fairy tale, and it's important to know that. And I think the more that young people can tell people, this is a fairy tale. This thing that you believe did not happen, or it's more complex than that. That's how we begin. America's caught up now in conspiracies like QAnon, and the election was rigged, and even to the point that people think that's not even Joe Biden, it's some kind of monster, or it's actually Trump, and he's going to, really people are walking around like that in the United States, and they're walking around like that in Ireland, and they're walking around like that in Britain. And whenever you hear it, just say no. Look people in the eye and say, no, let me give you a fact. And people don't want to hear facts, you can't make them. But arm yourself with facts, because there are plenty out there and they're available.
Bonnie, we're getting loads of questions in. I'm conscious that Joseph has asked for a couple. Sorry, Joseph, I haven't got to you, but
I'm here as long as you want me to be. I'm here.
But Joseph has asked, as an American, Black person, did Obama let your ethnicity down? Was Obama not radical enough?
That's a very good question. Well, I always say Obama's triumph was that he lived through his presidency. He had 2 terms. We all didn't think he was going to make it. I'm old enough to have witnessed an assassination of a president on lunchtime TV. Okay, so that's always been part of my sort of memory. I'm just glad Barack made it. Was he radical enough? I don't even know what that means. The fact that he got elected was radical for me. And I leave that to others, I think, to answer. I think he was hemmed in immediately as soon as he became president. Of course, you know that the president of the United States cannot govern without a legislative body, and he had none at all for 10 years. He was able to get the Affordable Care Act through. He was able to do things he wanted to do, but he was hamstrung. And when you have another Irishman called Mitch McConnell, who stands up in the Capitol of the United States and says, my job is to make Barack Obama one-term president, Obama was in trouble from the get-go. But like I say, he survived his presidency, and I think that's a triumph. So no, I'm not disappointed in him at all.
Okay, Bonnie, let's just push it on a little bit. And Anthony asked a question. Do you think that American-style politics with the culture wars and race divisions are coming to the UK and Europe?
Yes, mainly because it's an online culture. So a lot of us are online, young people live online. So yeah, absolutely. They're pushing woke as the enemy in Great Britain, cancel culture as the enemy in Great Britain. These terms are tripping off the lips of, white guys in their 70s. They don't actually know what it means, but it's there. Piers Morgan used it in his breakfast television show. So it's there, and that's what they're trying to bring over here as a way to smash any kind of progressive movements, any kind of left movements, anything that might bring people together. They are using the terminology that's grown up in America. And I want to say something about woke. Woke, and I wrote about this, woke is an African American expression, and it's a beautiful expression. When African Americans, when a person like Harriet Tubman was a conductor on what's called the Underground Railroad, which was a system of safe houses, you would come into a slave quarter and say, come with me, and you go on the route called the Underground Railroad. And what you did was the Harriet Tubman would say, stay woke. What she meant was, A, keep your eyes open because they were traveling at night. Don't go to sleep. And the second thing was, you were going north because you kept your eye on the North Star, the Big Dipper. That was a gospel song called Follow the Drinking Gourd and Stay Woke. And that's how people, those of us who use the term woke, to stay alert to oppression, stay alert for our fellow human beings, stay alert for the environment, for the other pieces of life and life that lives with us on this planet. And the writers appropriated it and made it seem like something awful.
Roma makes a point and asks a question, what's your experience in England? And I note that you've recently commented about your experience of casual racism in the wake of the royal family and Harry and Meghan's recent
yeah.
What do you think about your time living in the UK?
First of all, the United Kingdom has been 98% kind to me. I made the right choice in deciding to live here most of my life. And I wouldn't have become a citizen if I felt that it was the wrong place for me. In the United Kingdom, the people I've encountered have been kind, supportive, and I mean that, wonderful people. But it is and I'm saying, but it is a deeply masculine culture. They don't know how masculine they are. And the masculinity has to do with not showing emotion, with overtly, without actually showing that you care. And they do care, but you don't show it. And now because of Brexit, there is a deep kind of jingoism that's coming back in the form of all sorts of, the flag is coming out. I mean, one thing that was really great, that's Soho outside my door. The one thing that's really great about, was great about living in the United Kingdom is I didn't see flags all over the place. In America, there are flags in public toilets. There are flags in the, in the garage.
You must come to Belfast, Bonnie.
I know, I saw them, but there were no flags. There were no flags in London. There was nothing. And I just thought this is so wonderful. And now the flags are coming back. So, but for me, it has been an experience for the most part that's been very kind and wonderful. But I think for Black British people born in the country, it hasn't been the greatest experience in the world. And they and other people of color are speaking out, and I support them.
Noel Russell asks, were you surprised at the reaction you got over your comments on question time about Brexit? Was there a reaction in Ireland?
Yes. And I don't even know what made me say it. I don't know what, because I've looked at it a couple of times and not listened to it so much. I looked at my body language, and I was doing very like my mother, very Chicago, like, and I thought, well, what made me do that? And I think, I don't know what made, somebody either did something on the panel and I thought, I'm sick of this, I'm tired. Or somebody said something in the audience. But again, this is unconscious. The British, especially the English, when they say they're going to France, when people say they're going to Paris, they'll say, did you have a good time? And you think, people work in Paris. Don't you go to France without having to play? And Ireland is this kind of doolally, like either it's fighting all the time or it's blurry or something. And a lot of British people speak in very proprietary terms about Ireland. They don't even realize they're doing that. North and South, they don't realize it. And I guess I lost my temper because somebody said something. And there was a young Irish guy on the team. And I came off, I just said what I said, and I came off and his face was beaming. And he said, thank you for saying that. I said, what did I say? I thought it was understood. And I got a lot of mail, and I got people, a friend of mine from California, I haven't heard from in 20 years, gets in touch with me, says, people were crying in this bar in Santa Monica. I'm thinking, well, what did I say that I thought was clear, that this country, your country, owes nothing to anybody, and should proceed and does proceed through the world that way, and I support that.
Joseph asks, would you ever stand as a politician?
No, Joseph.
And why not? Why not?
No,
no,
no, because you can't tell the truth if you're a politician. You just can't. I mean, you tell a kind of truth, but you can't really do it.
It's a terrible way to disparage our politicians, Bonnie.
Well, let me say it this way. You can, but you pay for it, and you have to be ready for the price. And if you are ready for the price, then do it. But if you aren't, it's not a good job. I've known a lot of politicians, and it's hard. It's difficult.
Bonnie, we still have over 100 people on this video.
I'm here however you want to stay. I'm here.
Hit a few more questions if you don't mind.
I'm here.
And maybe just push it on, a little bit broader. And I think Nuala Wilson asks, a lovely question. You've touched on this, Bonnie. Do you think the future looks better with young people? Absolutely,
100%. I'm counting on you guys. Don't let me down. I'm going to be around. I will be around if I'm in my wheelchair with dark glasses on. I'm going to be watching you. Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally support you. You're smarter than my generation was. You got more courage, and you aren't going to sell out. So yeah, totally 100%. Keep going.
And again, maybe changing tack a bit. So Catherine Crowley thanks you, but asks, have you any tips on safe spaces to share poetry or writing about issues from history and social issues today?
I'm learning about safe spaces because I never was in any. So I'm learning about them. I think that safe spaces are cooperative efforts. As again, I've never been in one. I don't know what they are. Part of me, and this may sound like not a good thing to say, I think that life isn't about safe spaces. I've never had one. I understand why people need them. I understand why people want them. I support people need them and want them. But I would say at the end of the day, it isn't about that. And if you're a young person, with respect, I'm saying that to you as somebody who's been in very unsafe spaces. Um, but if you have some poetry to say, stand up in the middle of the town square and say it. It's very important.
Joseph is obviously a bit of a culture vulture. He asks, first of all, New Orleans jazz or Chicago blues? And then he goes on to reference Amanda Gorman. Her poetry rocks the world. You're a poet. So what do you think about her, her youth, color, etc.?
You know what? I'm going to put Amanda in the rap category for now. And I'm not putting rap down by saying that. Rap is masterwork. But I'm putting Amanda in more of the rap category at the moment. And she's very, very young. She's incredibly gifted and intelligent. I'm looking forward to her going into poetry. And I think she's got the juice to do that. So that's why I put her in the elevated rap category. To me, a poet is Seamus Haney. And the difference is, and this is my opinion, and it means it's true. A poet can never be in command of the words. The words are in command of the poet. And you go down the road that the poem takes you. You never, ever command the poem. Never. And whereas a rapper has to command the rap, because the rap exists within not only the words, but the meter and the beat. If you don't got the beat, you're not actually going to be able to convey what you need to convey. So a rapper can't ever lose that, because people can't hear it and they can't get into it. A poet always has to be lost, always. And then you go down the road of the poem. So that's why I put Amanda a little bit more in the rap category than the poet category. But that's a matter of taste. It's a matter of your own feelings. A poem is a poem to you, and I am I'm going against what the world feels, but that's been my modus operandi most of my life. So there you go.
Do you write any poetry? Because you're better known perhaps as a playwright, but
no, I would never be. I would never. I mean, some people have said what I write is poetic, but I would never do that. A poet is to me the highest, and I can't do that. I can't do that.
Now, Roma asked a question. Why are the arts so important, particularly for working class communities?
Why are they?
Yeah.
Because the arts express the inner life. They define, they tell us who a person is. Through language, dance, however you want to define it. As you were saying this to me, Pete, I remember I thought Maya Angelou, somebody who, and a poet, somebody who had no right to poetry if you looked at her from the outside or if you judged her by her life. But because she took the right of poetry and the right of art, she therefore defined herself and her people. And it's the best way, the strongest way to do it is through art and through culture, not politics, art and culture. Because within culture, you find the grain of yourself. And then within that grain, you you define. For instance, I'm a synesthete. I don't know if people know what synesthesia is, but I hear music all the time. And when I use words, I'm speaking now, I see images and I hear music. And when I said this about Maya Angelou, I remember myself, I lived in New York in the 80s. I remember myself suddenly for the first time hearing U2. And what I heard in U2 was Martin Luther King in their song In the Name of Love that blew me away. And it wasn't them so much. It was that these guys who were light years away from my culture found something in his speeches and his life that they could make some music out of. That's art. That's also Irish. That is also the expression of what you all have brought to the world, is this audacity. And I'm thinking again as a synesthete, in a movie called Yankee Doodle Dandy made in 1942, James Cagney won an Oscar for that. And he plays, I forgot his name, but anyway, a great songster. And there's a moment in Yankee Doodle Dandy where James Cagney does something very bold. He does something called the Irish stiff leg, which you only see in Irish dance halls or whatever, because before that, tap dancing was defined by African-American tap. And Fred Astaire picked up on some of those things, but he didn't do Irish stiff leg. And in Yankee Doodle Dandy, he plays George M. Cohan. There's a moment where he's singing, I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy. He's on the stage and he does Irish stiff leg, jack leg tap, which is like mind blowing. And you sit there, especially as an African American who is used to seeing African American tap, what the hell is that? It's amazing. And that automatically defined him, his culture, his people, his moment in the American dream, his moment in the American art scene. It's an amazing thing, and you have to see it. Nobody's done this again because you can't. And it must be something to do with, as I'm saying again, thinking, it must be something to do, it's called stiff leg, jack leg, and it must be something to do with either an observation in the community or a moment that something happened in the community, and that dance, it was expressed in that dance. You can see it on YouTube. It is, and it is just stunning, stunning that he does. It's amazing.
Well, Bonnie, we've sort of reached full circle. You've now described a positive feature, perhaps, of Irish America, after starting off and I think holding up a very powerful mirror, you know, to Irish American culture and how we, living in this part of the world, can perhaps challenge, you know, the racism and the prejudice which
Yes, you can.
in the States, and certainly through our festival, by showcasing people like you and hearing your stories and, you know, hearing your wisdom and your advice, particularly on art and culture. I'm sure our online audience can take something from that. We've had you on for an hour and a half, so I think thanks to all our questioners and people who have attended. But I think I'm going to have to draw things to a close.
Oh, one more question, Pete. I can take one more question. Yeah, one more question.
Just have a wider one. I know that Anthony has been sitting for a while.
Okay, we got to do it.
Harking right back then. Was there a political force that tried to divide African Americans and Irish Americans, or was it just kind of natural? He says that in Cape Town, it was a mixed area until the pass laws moved Black Africans, you know, out of that area.
Yes, it was Richard Nixon and his Republican Party began to work on Northern Irish Americans and Southern Irish Americans. LBJ passed the Great Society, which remade America and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which really enfranchised mainly African Americans, gave us access to education, which is what I benefited from. And what Richard Nixon did was stoke the politics of resentment. And he put Irish Americans in that bag, even though Irish Americans were very anti-war, they were on the left, they were in the civil rights movement. He then said, hey, but wait a minute, you aren't going to get the benefit of these prizes because you aren't Black. And that began about 1969, 1970. So his whole presidency was stoking the politics of resentment. Ronald Reagan, who was Irish American, tried in his kind of way to do Morning in America and try kind of, I would say, kind of not do that, but he was caught on tape making racist remarks about Irish Americans and African Americans. And some of that, a lot of that politics of resentment traveled along. And so the Southern strategy, which was set up by Richard Nixon to turn Southern Democrats into Republicans, to which they remain today, the politics of resentment was stoked up north, and that's where we are right now. So yeah, it definitely had a beginning.
Great. Well, listen, folks, we're going to leave it there. Bonnie, once again, thank you very much for your participation. We
Thank
hope
you
to
for
see you in
having me here.
Belfast when
You
the war
certainly will.
starts.
You certainly will.
And for everyone logging in, whatever, there's lots of other events during the festival that hopefully you can join us. But I'm sure you'll join with me in thanking Bonnie for what I'm sure you'll agree has been a fascinating discussion.
Thank you, and thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.